want to start this video by saying that the incident you're about to hear is 100% true and tragic. It was hard to write about this case. If you suffer from claustrophobia or don't want to hear something upsetting, please turn this video off now. John Edward Jones loved spelunking with his family. His father frequently took him and his brother Josh on caving expeditions in Utah when they were kids. The boys learned to love the underground depths and their dark beauty. Unfortunately, John's first expedition into Nutty Putty Cave, southwest of Utah Lake and about 55 miles from Salt Lake City, would be his last. John Edward Jones entered Nutty Putty Cave at around 8 PM local time on the evening of November the 24th, 2009, a few days before Thanksgiving. John, 26 at the time, and Josh, 23, along with 9 other friends and family members, decided to explore Nutty Putty Cave as a way to connect with each other ahead of the holiday. At the time, John was attending medical school in Virginia, where he lived with his wife, Emily, and 1-year-old daughter, Lizzie. Their second child was due in June. He had come back home to Utah to spend some relaxing holiday time with his family. Things did not go according to plan. It had been years since John was in any cave, and at 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, he wasn't the little kid he used to be. The group explored a large chamber of the cave called the Big Slide before John and Josh broke off with 2 friends to find a challenge, a tight but navigatable passage called the Birth Canal. They split, wriggling themselves into tight alcoves and passages to look for it. John picked a waist-high hole to explore. He wore a rainbow-coloured 1970s style caving headlamp his father had bought him for the family trips of his childhood. John went in head first, pushing himself along with his hips, stomach, and his fingers. Other cavers exploring this particular hole had found that only the nimblest of contortionists could navigate its tight corkscrew of rock. This is where John's situation began to get extremely dangerous. As John was crawling through this tight hole, he had second thoughts and wanted to turn back. However, there was no place big enough to turn his body around and leave the tunnel. So with that in mind, he kept inching his way forwards, squeezing his body through. He was likely thinking that he had made it to the birth canal. In front of John was a fissure that dropped almost straight down. He must have thought that at the bottom it widened out, giving him a place to turn himself around and get out. Rescuers believe at this point John must have sucked in his chest to investigate the fissure, sliding his torso over a lip of rock and down into the 10-inch wide side of the crevice. But when his chest expanded again, he was completely stuck. As John struggled and tried to free himself, he only made himself slide deeper into the narrower 8.5-inch wide side of the fissure. John's situation was perilous. He had one arm pinned beneath him and the other forced backwards on an outcropping of rock. His headlamp bounced off. Instead of widening so John could get out, the crack narrowed and all but closed. When Josh learned that his brother was stuck, he thought that it was going to be the beginning of another family adventure story. During their childhood cave explorations, their father had gotten stuck between 2 rocks. His father managed to work his way out, but the story entered the pantheon of family lore. As Josh managed to wind his way through the tunnel, crab crawling feet first between the cramped, claustrophobia-inducing walls, he felt a creeping apprehension. When he reached the corkscrew, he got himself stuck. He could now see his brother, and dread settled in. All Josh could see of John was his feet sticking out of the tight fissure. Seeing how swallowed he was by the rock, that's when I knew it was serious, said Josh. In their moment of hopelessness and desperation, the 2 devoutly Mormon brothers prayed together. Josh wrapped his feet around John's ankles and pulled as hard as he could. John's body inched its way up, but because his arms were stuck and unusable, he had nothing to hold onto and slipped back into the crevice as soon as Josh released him. Josh felt powerless and overwhelmed. His older brother was stuck and helpless in a dark hole. John wouldn't have been able to see anything, perhaps not even the walls of his new prison, inches from his face. Josh realised they needed search and rescue teams now and crawled his way back to the surface and called 911 while one of the friends went to the tunnel to stay with John. Knowing help was on the way, Josh readied for another trip down the tunnel to take the friend's place. The brothers made small talk to take their minds out of the cave. John prayed, "I'm so sorry, Father, just get me out of here, save me for my wife and kids." After an hour had passed, Josh learned search and rescue had arrived and went to the entrance to find them. Now, let's talk about human physiology. Obviously, the human body is designed to walk upright alongside the force of gravity, not against it. When trauma physician Doug Murdoch learned of John's situation, he told rescuers that the man didn't have much time. Despite there being a lack of research as to what happens to the human body upon long periods of being upside down, he gave John 8 to 10 hours to live, so they had to act fast. Being upside down, your body has to pump the blood out of the brain all the time, Doug said. Your body just isn't set up to do that. The entire system starts to fail. Doug headed for the scene. He knew that blood and fluids would be pooling in John's brain and lungs. The first rescuer to go down to see John, well, his feet anyway, was Susie Matala. Crawling on her belly, she inched her way through the cramped tunnel, sweating in the 70-degree heat and stifling humidity. She knew this part of the cave was unmapped and said that the passage was no wider than the opening of a washing machine. Susie had ropes tied around her ankles so she could be pulled out if need be. After 20 minutes of struggling through the tight tunnel, she finally got close enough to John to speak. She said, "Hi John, my name's Susie. How's it going?" She said that the reply seemed to come from the other end of a long hallway. "Hi Susie, thanks for coming, but I really want to get out." It's probably worth mentioning that John was completely encased and swallowed by the rock, all 6 foot, 200 pounds of his body. Susie, on the other hand, was 5 foot and 3 inches, and while she couldn't stretch her arms and legs, she remained confident. Inside the tunnel, Susie tried everything she could think of to free John. She tied a rope around John's ankles and strung it back to the rest of the team in an effort to pull him out. The team pulled, but they just didn't have enough power to free John. The friction of the rope rubbing the stone was too strong. Susie helped him shift positions just slightly, but she couldn't lift him. She cut off some of his jeans to free up a few inches. She joked that she would have a story to tell his wife and asked if he would like to get some pancakes once they got out. After 2 hours of trying, Susie had exhausted everything she knew and crawled out for a rest while another rescuer took her place. In the meantime, the team worked to reduce the friction problem by rigging a pulley system, which are essentially hooks anchored into the walls of the tunnels with the rope running through it. Unfortunately, the walls were lined with a thick layer of powdery calcite, which made it difficult to set up the pulley system. After each new hook was placed, they'd try the system again, and if the friction was still too great, they'd add another. This was painfully slow. Each trip to pass a single piece of gear took nearly an hour. As this was going on, the county sheriff set up a command centre and rescue leaders ran through idea after idea. Was there a back entrance to the cave? No. The rescuers who worked on an explosion that trapped 6 miners back in 2006 didn't have much advice. 6 gallons of vegetable oil to help slide John out was ordered. Explosives were also considered, but it was determined that they wouldn't work. Equipment continued to arrive throughout the day, but the larger equipment couldn't be brought down close enough to John, and the small equipment was too slow. An attempt to widen the rocky corkscrew for John's exit lasted an hour and a half and was only able to drill through 6 inches of rock. That night, John's wife spent the entire night waiting by the phone expecting news that John was free. That call never came. On the morning of November 25th, she could wait no longer and drove to the cave with John's parents. She was met by Utah's County Sheriff Lieutenant Tom Hodgson, who said while tearing up, "We'll get John out, we'll get him out for you." This confused her, but he knew what the cave could do. Hodgson was present 6 years ago when a boy was stuck in the same tunnel that trapped John, just not as far as John, and not down the vertical fissure. A pulley system freed the 5 foot, 7 inches, 140 pound teen, but John was bigger, much farther down the tunnel, and only 6 inches of his legs could be reached. With the pulley system in place, the team pulled with all their might, but John's feet hit the tunnel's low ceiling. With his heart struggling to pump blood into his legs, the contact made him scream in pain. The rescuers now came to a horrible realization. The angle of the tunnel meant that they couldn't bend John's body backwards without breaking his legs. But in his weakened state, the shock could kill him. At this point, John had been trapped upside down for 12 hours. Ryan, who was part of the rescue effort, arrived and came down to John. John was now starting to lose touch with reality in the darkness. John told Ryan, "Help me get out. I don't want to be on my head." Ryan said, "Why are you on your head?" John replied, "Why did you guys put me here?" John went on, "I'm sorry I'm so fat. It would be so much easier for you guys to get me out of here if I wasn't so fat." This made Ryan smile, and he said that when they get out, they'll be workout buddies. The crew brought a telecom, a set of 2 radios that transmitted through cable line. They strung it all the way from the entrance to John, so his wife Emily could speak to him. Emily told him, "I love you, just keep fighting." John yelled repeatedly, "I love you." Ryan could tell he was crying. John had been trapped for 19 hours now, and the rescuers finally felt that they had perfected the pulley system and believed that they now possessed the power and leverage to pull him out. Ryan readied John for what was about to happen. In the pit, 8 people working as one pulled with everything they had, lifting John's body out of the vertical crevice an inch at a time. Ryan began to hope. Suddenly, Ryan screamed and blacked out. When he came to, blood was everywhere. His jaw felt broken and his eye was swelling. The pulley system had failed and a huge piece of heavy metal had hit Ryan straight in the face. Hope seemed to drain from the situation as John was plunged back into the hole. Ryan's father Dave was working the pulley line. Ryan, now inside an ambulance heading for the hospital, his father took his place beside John. John said, "I'm going to die right here. I'm not going to come out of here, am I?" "We're going to get you out," Dave replied. Dave noticed that John's voice was becoming distant and that he was having a hard time breathing. Dave raced out of the cave and pulled the sheriff aside. "He's dying right now. He has a heartbeat, but he's had difficulty breathing before I got there. You can't get someone down there before he dies." The sheriff sent another man down to take Dave's place along with another radio. Emily tried to speak to John, but he never replied. He'd fallen unconscious and never woke up. At 11:56 p.m. on November the 5th, 2009, John was pronounced dead by a paramedic who crawled into the cave. Unfortunately, they weren't able to recover the body either. Shortly after the incident, the cave was deemed unsafe and would become John's final resting place after the entrance was sealed shut with cement. On June the 25th, the following year, Emily gave birth to their baby. She named him John. Be sure to have a look at the sources. They documented this tragic event in a lot of detail, more than I was able to quote and paraphrase from them. Be safe out there, guys. I'll catch you next time.